David O. Russell just seems to, when I watch it, manage to get the nuance of every character so well, and he did this the same in The Fighter and many other films. So I'm wondering how much of this, script and how much of the book is in the script, and how much of it is just, David O. Russell.
But you have to have a strategy.
I hate my illness, and I want to control it.
I hope you're okay with Veronica's sister coming over.
Tiffany and Tommy?
Just Tiffany.
What happened to Tommy?
He died.
How'd he die?
Please, don't bring it up.
Hey, Tiffany. This is Pat.
You look nice.
Thank you.
How'd Tommy die?
I'm a huge David O. Russell fan. I was, all the way from, the mid-90s until now. And when I was writing the book, I was an unpublished author working in my in-laws' basement. And, if you had asked me at that time who would be the perfect person to direct this film,
Right.
I would have listened to him, number one. And I told him that when I met him. And he didn't believe me. He accused me of, he actually accused my agent in LA of putting me up to it, like it's a joke to say
Right.
that. But it's absolutely true, so I'm thrilled with the adaptation.
Is the reason that you wanted David O. Russell because of the way that he can manage to juggle comedy and the serious stuff so well? I mean, he does it so much better than almost anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I talked to David, when he read the book, originally the producers were Anthony Minghella and Sidney Pollack, and Harvey Weinstein was involved. And, they presented the book to him, and they said this would be a great story, but the tone is going to be really tricky.
Right.
And when you're talking about mental health issues, which are near and dear to my heart.
Mine as well.
Yeah, and you're talking about making a comedy, obviously it's a tricky thing because you want to be laughing at the absurdity of what we all experience through the human condition and never at people. And I think that David was very smart and careful about the way that he crafted it. And I know that mental health issues are really important to David as well. And I think if you see the film, you see that. And when people have read my book, the people who get it the most are people from the mental health community. And I think this film is going to appeal to a very wide audience, people that just want to see a comedy, people that want a date night movie. But I think the people from the mental health community are going to see this and walk away with something really special.
What meds are you on?
I used to be on lithium and Seroquel.
I was on Xanax.
You ever take Klonopin?
Klonopin,
Like,
yeah.
is it what?
I'm tired, I want to go. Are you going to walk me home or what?
You have poor social skills. You have a problem.
I have a problem?
Mm-hmm.
You say more inappropriate things than appropriate things.
Well, and last night I watched it with somebody from the mental health community, somebody, probably the closest person to me in my life. And she loved it. She's quiet about it. I mean, that's kind of that's how
Sure.
mental health
Yep.
is. But that's another thing that I wanted to ask you. How is it, like personally? Are there any things in this film that were directly out of your personal life, or are there things that you didn't put in there, or things that are in the book that touched you? And how is it that mental illness touched your life? Were there specific people that that touched your life in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll say that the book is fiction, right? It's
Right.
The characters aren't supposed to represent anyone in my life. But I think people that read my books, all of my books, they see the theme of mental health. It runs throughout all of them quite clearly. I do struggle with depression and anxiety. I'm always talking about how, so many members of the mental health community are artists, because they're people that see the world differently. The way that their brain works, the chemicals in our brains makes us have a different experience than a lot of other people. And why that can be difficult for me, I like to celebrate that. And so when I wrote the Silver Linings Playbook, I quit a teaching job. I had tenure at a very good high school, and I went to live with my in-laws in Massachusetts. I was living in Philly before that, and I was very much alone in a basement trying to figure out where I wanted my life to go, how to get my depression and anxiety under control. And I'm always saying that writing is a great way to do therapy.
Right.
And I think a lot of artists would agree with that.
Yeah.
You try to take the chaos of your life and make order on the page. And so in terms of the characters, my great-grandmother died in a mental health old school institution, we're talking a long time ago. And I knew about that, but no one in my family really talked about it. I've only talked about it with my grandmother recently. She's she just turned 90. And only now is she willing to kind of talk about the experiences that she had of seeing her mother be institutionalized. I also worked for a year at a place called Bancroft in New Jersey, in a neural health facility at night, They called it a lockdown unit, and I worked with teenagers diagnosed with autism for a year. And being that firmly in the mental health community really inspired me. It was a great education, and it gave me a better awareness of the things that I was dealing with. Because growing up in a blue-collar neighborhood, we didn't say the word mental health.
Right.
You know, like I didn't even know what bipolar disorder was. Anxiety, that was not a term that we had in, you know, the late 80s, early 90s.
I don't even think it was called bipolar back then. I think it was just manic depression.
Yeah, and to admit that you were struggling with depression or any type of mental illness was so taboo that I know that it was very difficult for certain friends of mine and family members to get help at that time. Of course, it's a lot better now, but there's still the stigma, there's still the taboo.
In the military, it's still terrible.
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
just came out of the military about 4 or 5 years ago, and I worked in a place called Robinson Health Clinic for the 82nd Airborne, and there is a unit for mental health on there. But they had a record low amount of people who supposedly had depression, but they had a record amount of suicides.
Yeah.
And so what we did on our unit is the doctor from the hospital who wasn't affiliated with the 82nd Airborne, he started a questionnaire for all the sick call kids.
Yeah.
You know, we're not calling them kids, they were all young, you know. And it just in a couple of weeks, he managed to diagnose somewhere around 200 soldiers that had, you know, the symptoms for, you know, post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And the stigma, at least in the military, and this, like how you were saying, just period in the world, was just that, oh, you're just being weak, you know?
It's tough, you know. One of the toughest guys I know, you know, most gruff, you know, has guns in his house is my Uncle Pete, and he's a Vietnam vet, and I'm very proud of that. And, you know, obviously he came back at a time from war when, you know, we didn't talk about any of this stuff. And he's very active with the veteran community, and even vets that are coming back now and counseling. He's one of my biggest fans. You know, he reads all my work and even my YA stuff. That you know, I have one book called Sort of Like a Rock Star. It has a picture of a teenage girl on it, and the cover was all different colors. You would think that Vietnam vet would never read that book. He read that book and loved it. And I think what he relates to is the feeling of people being marginalized and people realizing and reaching across the table to make connections with those people. And I think he values that strongly. And so, you know, all of this stuff becomes a metaphor for what's going on in society.
Right.
And if my book and David's movie and our work can get a conversation going about mental health, like that's great. You know, that's really important to me, and I hope that that's what happens with the film.
So how's your job?
I just got fired, actually.
Oh, really? How?
By having sex with everybody in the office.
Everybody?
I was very depressed after Tommy died.
We don't have to talk about it.
Thanks.
How many were there?
I think a movie like this, which is very accessible, like you were saying last night about The Master, which is a masterpiece, it's a wonderful film.
Great film.
But that movie is much less accessible than this movie. This movie is going to be a movie that a lot of people are going to go and see. I think it's going to make a pretty good amount of money. And I think people will see it, and they will see that nuance. And that actually leads me to my next character, the Jennifer Lawrence character, who, to me, if she doesn't win the Academy Award this year, it's going to be like, what? You know, she's had a fantastic year with the Hunger Games, and this film is just one of the best performances I've seen in a long time. And one of the reasons for me that is I know a woman directly who, like I said, I spend more time than anybody with, and that, like, especially that sequence at the diner,
Yeah.
the way that she manages to go from up to down to then understanding the way that he feels. The song's in his head, but I'm assuming that that song's not really playing, he's just hearing it, and nobody else hears it, but she knows he hears it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I see directly all the time from, you know, in the real world.
Yeah.
And she just gets it so spot on. So I'm wondering, you said last night that her character was the closest to the character in the book.
Yep.
Was there somebody personally, a woman personally, that you know you were able to connect that from, or did you manifest that from your own experiences?
You know, Tiffany, she's not based on anyone directly that I know. And, you know, of course, when I was writing her, I just tried to create an authentic character. But I think that my father, you know, the most unlikely person to say something like this, he read the book and he said, you know, I really got your book, and Tiffany is the unsexy solution to Pat's problem. The whole time Pat thinks he wants Nikki, you know, and he thinks that teaming up with Tiffany would be this bad thing for him. And I think a lot of people would look at someone like Tiffany, and John Ortiz says in the film, like, she does a lot of therapy, like, watch out. And we often discredit people like that. But again, like, there are people that see the world in a different way, and sometimes they can see things that the rest of the world, you know, isn't aware of. And I get responses all the time, like, they're just all over the map to my book. And I'll be at a reading and someone will come up and say, you know, I thought your book was hilarious. And then the next person will come up and say, I loved your book, but it was so sad. Mm-hmm. And I think when I hear responses like that, I feel as though I'm getting the response to mental health from people,
right.
You know? And I have had so many people say to me, you know, I just thought that Pat was unbelievable, the way that he acts in the book. You know, I don't know anybody like that. He's completely believable. And then I go and talk to the next person in line, in the signing line, and they'll say, the father in the book, that's my father. Pat, that's my husband. Like, you nailed this. And so what that tells me is really that if you have had experience with people in the mental health world, you get these things.
Right.
Like, you understand. And the sad part is when people say, you know, these characters are unbelievable, it just lets me know that not only have these people not had any experience with these people, but they're also unwilling to believe that these people exist. And if they are unwilling to believe that they exist, they're unwilling to accept them, to get them the help. And I think that's the larger problem.
Let me just break it down for you. The whole time you're rooting for this Hemingway guy to survive the war and to be with the woman that he loves.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning.
Can't somebody say, hey, let's have a good ending to the story? I can't apologize. You know what I will do? I will apologize on behalf of Ernest Hemingway, because that's who's to blame here.
Yeah, have Ernest Hemingway call us and apologize to us, too.
I'm going to close on a lighter note.
Okay.
Because obviously most of what we've been talking about here has been pretty down. But you are coming into Dallas with a movie that literally culminates with the Cowboys getting beaten.
I was worried about that, to tell you the truth.
So, I mean, I thought it was hilarious. I can't wait for my dad to see it, because my dad is basically the Robert De Niro character on the flip side.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm wondering, what were you thinking?
I mean, let's get this out. I bleed green, you know. I'm an Eagles fan since I was a little kid. And, you know, for me, watching Eagles games with my dad is not a very expressive guy. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a neighborhood where the men in the neighborhood, they didn't tell you that they loved you, they didn't give you hugs, you know, they weren't that type of men. They weren't those types of men. But they took you to Eagles games. You know, and when you sat next to your dad at the Eagles game, that was how you knew that you were part of something. It was almost like an inheritance. And the interesting thing, I was watching the movie last night too, and I was worried, you know, we get to the end, are people going to boo? And it was funny because everyone clapped, you know, and I think really, again, it becomes a vehicle, it becomes a metaphor for everyone's experience on Sunday. Whether you love football or hate football, everyone sat in that room with the family and, you know, have found that common ground.
You're absolutely right. I've never been a big football fan, but my dad is like I said, he's just like De Niro, and I love sitting with him on Sunday. And I will find myself rooting for it, even though, then, you know, 10 minutes from then, I'm really not going to care. But it matters so much to him, and that connection is so important.
Yeah, and I think it's just, my wife has always hated football. This year she's kind of gotten into it a little bit. And
so she's kind of like the Tiffany character.
Yeah, a little bit.
You always do. She's the closest person to you.
Yeah, and she was at the game. We were at the Detroit game, and I usually go with my brother and sister. And of course, we're all big Birds fans, but really it's more, it's just the time that we set aside to get together. And my best friend from high school's there. And if it weren't for those games, it's a shame. But I don't know how much we would get together with kids and you know, jobs and all the adult responsibilities that we have. But if we set aside those 8 games, those 8 home games, we know we're going to see each other. And I think in the movie, that's in the book too, you see that that's the thing that bonds these people. And, you know, thank God for that, because there's so many family members I would have nothing to talk about if there wasn't sports and football. So.
Well, luckily my family does that at the Oscars, and I hope to see this film there.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate it.
It was great to meet you.
It's good to meet you too. Yeah.
This is what I believe to be true. You have to do everything you can. You have to work your hardest. If you stay positive, you have a shot at a silver lining. Wait, what's this?
Well, I thought you were doing it.
Oh, I thought you were doing it.